Afternoon, everybody, or evening, depending on when you're watching this. Welcome to the last episode of the Caleb Landis Show before our country's 250th anniversary. Got a very busy show for you today. We got some big Supreme Court decisions that have just dropped. We have James Tallarico and the spiritual battle that is politics. Scott Pressler's in the news again. My own America 250 tribute to close us out, and some Trump wins. And that is where we're going to begin. Some Trump wins. The news broke just after our last episode that Antifa members that had been arrested way back from a year ago, the July 2025 attacks at an ICE facility, the convictions for these first ever Antifa arrests, Antifa convictions on terrorist charges anyway, the convictions came down, and it totaled 450 years of prison time. Excellent news for any Trump voter or anybody who is concerned about law and order in America. Just a review of what these people did. Basically a riot at an ICE facility in Texas, and when the cops arrived, some of these Antifa terrorists opened fire. Actually, I believe it was just the one who opened fire in the direction upon the law enforcement, the ICE enforcement officers, etc. The ringleader, I guess, of the whole plot got 100 years himself. The other sentences range from 70 to 50 to 30 years. This is not something that happened under the Biden administration, obviously, and under the Trump administration. Not only are these arrests taking place, but now we are getting the convictions that we need to establish the fact, which should already be established across our country, that you cannot open fire upon law enforcement and expect to walk away unscathed. Frankly, I think the convictions there may be a little light, particularly for the individual who specifically opened fire, but I'll take what I can get, right? Which is exactly what the anti-Trump pseudo-right refuses to do. I don't know how often I have heard from this new, it's not right-wing group. That's why I call it pseudo-right, but they used to identify themselves as right, or even as by MAGA, and now that they're opposed to Trump, all I hear from them is that nothing is happening, right? That these arrests, no one is being arrested. Then the arrests happen, and then it's, well, there will be no convictions, or there have been no convictions, and now the convictions are starting to take place. There's some reality that we have to remember as we are judging the success of Trump 2.0, particularly when it comes to this law and order stuff, right? First of all, justice moves excruciatingly slowly. I know that's frustrating for a lot of us right now, but trust me, when the bad guys are in charge, you are glad. You will be glad. You were just recently very glad that there were checks in place in our system to make it difficult for the president to just be like, ow, and throw all his political opponents in jail, right? We just lived through the bad side of that. So you had better be glad that it's difficult and time-consuming to arrest, prosecute, and convict somebody for a crime in this country. The standard is high. But there's more to it than that. Trump is dealing with wacko judges who oppose his agenda, regardless of how secure his actions are under the law, who oppose his agenda at every turn, right? We recognize that, but I think sometimes we forget it. But it gets even worse than that. There are district attorneys and prosecutors who play a role in the execution of justice in our country that operate, I don't want to say independently of the executive branch, but they have their own spheres of authority, right? They have their own responsibilities. And if they are unwilling or unable to perform their responsibilities, then it can be difficult to impossible for justice to be enforced at the federal level. Now, what Trump can do to address this is to appoint better judges, and in some places, in some cases, district attorneys, right? But some of these attorneys, maybe attorneys general, something like that, some of these judges are elected independently of Trump's appointment, right? And even the ones that Trump has appointed have to be confirmed by the Senate. And we all know how often this Senate has been dragging its feet on the really important Trump priorities. So the pseudo-right world out there may have a right to be upset about some of the things that have not taken place as far as justice, convictions, and arrests are concerned. But I would argue that their ire should not be thrown at Donald Trump or his federal law enforcement officials, such as the FBI. The frustration should be with the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, who will not help Trump. What I find interesting is that this pseudo-right, this woke right, this podcast to stand universe out there doesn't seem to complain about squishy Republicans in Congress. It only seems to complain about Trump. Sometimes I wonder why that is, and you probably should too. But in any case, Trump got the convictions this time. Obviously, there will probably be some appeals. Again, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but 450 years of combined prison time for Antifa terrorists is great news for our country, no matter how you slice it. Thank you, Trump 2.0. Now we've got the Supreme Court decisions, right? Definitely a mixed bag this week, the Supreme Court decisions that have been announced. Some of them are extremely good news. The Supreme Court confirmed that the president can, in fact, end temporary protected status for non-citizens living here in the United States. Seems kind of obvious, right? It's temporary protected status. That doesn't mean permanent residence. Temporary, permanent, you see the difference there? I don't know why we needed the Supreme Court to remind us of that, but I'm glad they did. Something else the Supreme Court did this week. They upheld the rights of state governments to ban men in women's sports. Men identifying as women have been outlawed from competing in women's sports in certain levels and circumstances in some specific states. State legislators passed a law, and state governors obviously signed them. Those laws were challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that states can make those rules, which should remind you of the importance of these in-between elections, right? A fair amount of people are aware of the presidential elections every 4 years. We just had one in 2024. We're about to have another set of elections called the midterms because they come in the middle of a president's term. November 3rd, 2026 is election day this year in our country. Here in Pennsylvania, where I assume most of my listeners are from, we will be choosing a governor. And we will be choosing a congressman, and we will be choosing every member of the state house and some members of the state senate. In other words, this November 3rd will decide what party and what politicians are in charge of the state governments. The Supreme Court just said that if a state wants to, it can pass a law banning men from women's sports. This is something that consistently polls high among all Americans, right? Americans are becoming increasingly convinced that women and high school girls ought to be protected from men in their spaces and in their competitions, right? Men should not be able to use the girls' locker rooms. Men should not be able to use the girls' restrooms. Men should not be allowed to compete against women in sports, regardless of how they identify. What that means is, Pennsylvania, if you were willing and able to elect the right people this November, you can have a government that would do that for your state and for your schools. But it doesn't happen without voting. And I hate to make it partisan, but it doesn't happen without voting Republican. Even though there are a lot of Democrat voters who are in favor of very much common sense restrictions like men in men's sports, women in women's sports only, there are almost no Democrat politicians that are. The voters are, but the politicians aren't. So, if you want protection for your high school daughter in school sports or in girls' spaces in public life, you're going to have to vote for Stacey Garrity, the Republican candidate, who is a woman, by the way, for governor. And you're going to have to vote for the Republicans who are on your ballot further down, if they are state representative or state senators. It's this Tuesday, November 3rd. If that's an inconvenient day for you, get in touch with me, and I can set you up with early voting to make it easier for you to get your vote in. But if you want protection for women in women's sports, you're going to have to vote Republican in the midterm elections at state levels. Governors, state senators, state representatives. All of them will be on the ballot this November 3rd. That is the way forward now for you. The Supreme Court just opened the door for you, the voters of Pennsylvania, to go and choose the people that will protect women's spaces and women's sports. Those people are Republican candidates. You don't believe me? Look it up on AI. Which political party is more likely to defend women only in women's sports? The current Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro. Look up his very pro-trans stance on that for yourself. Don't vote for him if that is how you feel. Vote this November, not in 2 years. Vote this November and vote Republican if you are interested in protection of women's spaces and women's sports. It's really that simple. Now, the bad decisions are grabbing a lot of, from the Supreme Court, are grabbing a lot of headlines right now, understandably so. And the birthright citizenship is the big one there. The Supreme Court apparently said that any person anywhere in the world can come and have a baby here, and that baby is automatically granted full American citizenship status. That is a joke. That is preposterous. That's not even close to functional policy of a nation. We already have issues where people are coming here to have babies on purpose, many of whom are our enemies. And it's going to be very, very difficult for federal immigration enforcement to avoid that from happening, right? Doesn't matter how illegal or how sneaky the person was to get in here and have their child. If they are here when they have their child, that child is a U.S. citizen. This creates all kinds of ridiculous, now legal scenarios where, for example, Chinese communist operatives can come and pay. Well, they don't even have to come. They can pay for people to come and have babies here. That baby is an American citizen. Then they can go back home to China and they can raise this individual as a Chinese communist. And then this individual, when old enough, can come back to the United States and legally run for president. This is what the Supreme Court has said is A-OK. Now, there are things we can try. I mean, there's some kind of off-putting options, like no pregnant women are allowed in the United States, and if you get pregnant, you're gone. That's horrible. Who wants to do that, right? But what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to protect ourselves? Well, there are some other options we can try. I mean, we could amend the Constitution, right? But that's unrealistic. We could try legislation. Is that unrealistic to get Republicans to support legislation that says, no, any illegal immigrants' children are not granted full citizenship status just because they're here? Put restrictions on birthright citizenship. You can do that with legislation. There was a back door sort of built into the Supreme Court decision that would allow Congress potentially to do that. But is the Republican Congress, with their really skinny majorities and the people who oppose Trump no matter what out of spite, going to be able to do that? Are there enough Republicans in Congress who will put their personal butthurt feelings aside and vote for something that Trump wants if it's good for the country? I don't know. That is a tough situation. But what I want to point out is the way Trump responded to this decision, completely against the executive order that he had created, completely against his policy. Now, first, let's think about what he did not do. He did not send assassins to the Supreme Court justice's house to attempt assassination, as has happened on the American left. He did not suggest that the Supreme Court should be ignored, as often happens on the American left. And he has not and is not ignoring the court, as Joe Biden did, when the Supreme Court told him that he could not just cancel student loans, and he went ahead and canceled them anyway. He did not do any of the things that fascist dictators, as he is so often called, do. He did not respond in violence. He did not respond in ignoring the law, and he did not respond in rhetoric that suggests that the Supreme Court has no authority. That is what a fascist does, right? A fascist creates a world in which those that oppose him are either too scared or no longer powerful enough to be effective in opposing him, right? Trump's response demonstrated that he was considering all the legal ways to fight this. In his Truth Social post, he said that he mentioned the two legal options to fight this: a constitutional amendment and legislation. He said the constitutional amendment isn't practical. We should pursue legislation. So when the Supreme Court disagrees with him on one of his primary points of policy, immigration, this man, who's supposedly a fascist dictator, follows the law and pursues legal means to change the law, whereas it is the American left who ignores the law, undermines the law, and resorts to violence. Again, you don't believe that happened? Look it up. Maybe Grok, maybe ChatGTP. Find your favorite AI and find out about the assassination attempts from American leftists on Supreme Court judges, the way the Supreme Court, or the way Democrats like AOC say that the Supreme Court should be ignored when they disagree with it, and the way Joe Biden actually did ignore the Supreme Court with the student loan forgiveness programs. Look it up. The Democrats are the ones who are acting like fascists. Trump is the one who's acting like a law-abiding leader of our country. Important point for you to notice. Now, what about James Tallarico down in Texas? We've talked about him some on our show already. Interesting fella, not exactly... I crack myself up. Interesting fella is a great way to describe James Tallarico. Not exactly the kind of person that you would expect to be running for U.S. Senate in Texas, but he is, obviously, on the Democrat side. There was a Democrat candidate for some position in Texas. I don't remember what it was. It was a statewide office, if I remember correctly. He was out stumping for Tallarico, right? Giving him a little rah-rah speech. And this Democrat said that the major criticisms of Tallarico are that Tallarico is trans, that he's gay, that he's a tofu-eating vegan, and that Tallarico is going to hell. And his response to those criticisms was kind of bizarre. He said, when they say Tallarico is trans, we're all trans. And when they say that he's a gay tofu-eating vegan, we're all gay tofu-eating vegans. And when they say he's going to hell, guess what? We say we're all going to hell. Huh? What? Can we please stop pretending like politics is an amoral, non-spiritual, non-good versus evil battle in this country anymore? Did you catch the spiritual overtones there? I don't care so much about the other stuff. It makes sense to me that the Democrats would say, oh, we're all trans and we're all gay, tofu eating, that they would identify with those people. But he was telling Democrats that their approach to the Tallarico election is that if the Republicans say he's going to hell, then we will all join in. We would rather go to hell, or at least be hell-bound in a conservative Republican's eyes, than abandon our path to power here in Texas through this James Tallarico candidacy. Folks, that is bizarre. That is bizarre. Anybody who has even a modicum of understanding and respect for God in any generic sense understands that hell and being in hell is not something you want to identify with. And this is not even the best example of the spiritual overtones of the political fight that we're in right now. To me, the best example is not only what happened to Charlie Kirk, but the aftermath of Charlie Kirk. I have a bunch of homework assignments for you in this episode, so this is one of them. Sometime when you're not alone in a dark room and when you don't have a full stomach, look up the responses to Charlie Kirk's murder. And you will see just how demonic these people who reside on the American left have become. I am going to continue to sound this alarm. Politics in the United States has become an intensely spiritual battle. Certainly not everybody on the Republican side is on the good side of this spiritual battle, but the American left is animated by the demonic. They are militantly anti-God. And I don't care how long it takes for people to see this, I am going to keep reminding you that this is the case. And we have Scott Presler in the news again. Nothing unusual about that. The circumstances of him being in the news this time are kind of unique. He went to the South Dakota Republican Party meeting just after our last episode. South Dakota, home of Senator Thune, who is the Republican leader who is failing Republicans dramatically in many issues, particularly the Save America Act, which, by the way, is one of Scott Presler's primary focuses right now, campaigning for the Save America Act. Now, full disclosure, reminder, Scott Presler is my boss. I am the Erie County coordinator for Scott Presler's group, Early Vote Action, so I'm not exactly objective here. But what happened to Scott doesn't take an objective mind to judge. He was at the South Dakota meeting, and he was in possession of a ticket. He was given a ticket to go to the dinner meeting where some pretty hot-button issues concerning Senator Thune were going to be discussed. And some jerkwad at the door wouldn't let him in. And as Scott was making a video of explaining what was happening, the bozo, you've seen the videos by now with the cowboy hat and the beard looks even a little bit worse than mine, if I remember correctly, like leans into the frame and is like, hey, I'm the a-hole who won't let Scott in, and all this weird stuff about how he had a Facebook presence too, and he basically doesn't care about Scott's, whining and moaning session, and this is just how we're going to do things here. Now, Scott, as he always does, handled the thing with great grace and simply got back to work pursuing the passage of the Save America Act. Thankfully, the butthole at the door got fired from his job as like a sergeant in arms or something like that for the Republican Party in South Dakota. However, the Republican Party in South Dakota apologized to Scott, but refused to censure Senator Thune over his performance as a leader of the Republicans in the Senate and over what happened at the door to the meeting. Now, there was some debate as to whether or not this gentleman directly reported to Senator Thune, or whether Senator Thune or his staff had anything to do with keeping Scott out. But the message was clear and obvious, right? The message was, we here as the establishment in the South Dakota GOP and the national GOP don't really care about you, Scott, and the grassroots that you represent. You think you can come in here and tell us what to do. Well, guess what? You can't, and we are going to make sure that you and all the peons who support you out there know that. That was the message. Believe me, that is the message that the establishment GOP consistently gives to new and upcoming activists and people who want to be involved in the politics. Either you come to heel and lick their boots, or you will be squashed. It's kind of like what the Democrats do, actually. Except the Republicans try to do it a little bit more in secret. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, this is the way that threatened Republican establishment members act when they think that they are losing control of this party and party apparatus and losing status within the party apparatus. Clearly, they derive a lot of personal satisfaction and fulfillment from their positions of power and authority, and they plan on keeping on it. It's kind of political jerk-off, if you'll pardon the crudeness there, but that's kind of what it is. And it underscores the importance of voting in primaries when we choose between which Republican is going to represent us, because that's the only chance that we have to choose which Republicans are going to represent us, right? And it also underscores the importance of good people willing to volunteer even when they know they're going to run into self-centered bozos who are used to running the Republican Party. You are likely to face this if you try to volunteer in the Republican Party. I'm sorry, but these are the facts. I'm not telling you to not volunteer with the Republican Party, and I'm certainly not telling you to not volunteer for Republican causes. I'm telling you just the opposite, right? Now, I am happy to say that things have improved here in the Erie County Republican Party of recent days, right? So if you're considering volunteering in the Republican Party here in Erie County, go for it. Now is the biggest opportunity we've probably had in quite some time to build a better Republican Party. But I want you, wherever you're thinking about volunteering for Republican causes, to go in with your eyes open. Never think of your local Republican Party figures as some kind of angels who will always have your best interest or even the country's best interest at heart. It's the same thing with Republican politicians. Stop becoming fans of these Republicans and instead work to improve the Republican system as best we can. Because as we've discovered and discussed last week, there is no other way to improve the politics in the United States other than trying to improve the Republican side of things. And the only way to improve the Republican side of things is for good people to get involved, whether it be with the Republican Party or a Republican group like Early Vote Action. Now, I can promise you that we are not self-centered political jerks here in Early Vote Action. And there are many, many good people here in the local Republican Party and in the Republican parties around the country. But what Scott Pressler exposed, yet again, is that there is work to be done here in the Republican Party. So, please help us. Those of you who are not in it for the self-gratification or the ego boost or the love of power, those are the people that we need to get involved, despite the slings and arrows that you may get as you try to find a good fit for yourself, volunteering for Republican causes. Now we got a couple of minutes left. This is the last episode before our 250th birthday as a nation. And I will not, programming note, I will not be doing a podcast next Tuesday because I will be working over the entire holiday weekend. So I'm going to be taking a couple of days off after the holiday weekend to rest and celebrate and spend some time with my family. So no podcast next Tuesday. But as we close out before the holiday, I want to tell you a little story that I think is it's my favorite. It's my favorite America story, and I want to humbly offer it to you as my America 250 tribute. Before I got this job with Early Vote Action, I was a teacher at a small independent Christian school, private Christian school, I guess is the proper word. For my final 2 years there, one of the classes that I taught was 3rd and 4th grade social studies. I always approached it as a history class as much as I could. And state history is something that we traditionally teach in 4th grade in Pennsylvania education. So, I got to lead the 4th grade history trip, which took our students to Harrisburg, the Lancaster area, and Philadelphia. And we got to see all the big national historical sites in Philadelphia. The first time that I led this trip was in May of 2024. So in the very heart of the 2024 presidential election cycle. And as I was there at Christ Church, where all the founders worshipped as they were crafting the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And as I saw Independence Hall and walked the streets that Ben Franklin would have traveled to and from his abode while he was there, I was overwhelmed with the feeling of how similar my times were to their times. Now, maybe that's a exaggerated way of putting it, because if the threats that the founders were facing were far more severe than anything that I was facing at that point. But we as a nation were facing potential extinction. If we lost that election, it could be the end of America as we know it. In fact, I expected it to be if we lost. And that is exactly what the founders were facing. First, were they even going to be able to produce, to have an America as we know it? And the second time they came back to Philadelphia, as they were trying to form a constitution, were they going to be able to keep the country as the place of freedom and stability that it was designed to be? That was an extremely moving experience, especially when we went into the Museum of the Constitution. They have a big room there with a bunch of bronze, life-size, supposedly very realistic statues of the people who were in that room as they were building the Constitution, essentially building the American government. And it's really quite something, because they're all standing there around you in very lifelike poses. Kind of almost like a snapshot of them caught in the act of creating this incredible country with the incredible rights and freedoms that we still enjoy today. And I walk into that room just feeling how extraordinary their accomplishment was to be able to create a nation that almost 250 years later was still free. But as I was standing looking around at all of these makers, essentially, of our country, I was again so impressed with the fact that if this goes wrong in a couple of months, we could lose it all. And I didn't want to be the generation that was unsuccessful in handing off the freedoms that these men had given to me onto the next generation. So I reluctantly walked over to the front of the room where I knew the statue of George Washington was. He was standing very straight, very erect at the front of the room, presiding over the delegation, I suppose, as the president of the meeting, the leader of the meeting that was building our founding documents. And I hesitated to walk up to him for two reasons. Number one, I was afraid I would be a lot taller than him, which would be like blasphemy, right? Or I was afraid that I would be a lot shorter than him, because I already felt a lot smaller than him. In fact, I felt smaller than every single one of the individuals in that room, even the ones that were a good 1.5 feet shorter than I am. I didn't know if I was up to the task of passing the torch of freedom that these men had so miraculously lit and passed down through the ages. I didn't know if I was worthy of my heritage as an American. But I also couldn't avoid my confrontation with General Washington. So I walked over. And interestingly enough, he was actually a few inches shorter than me. But interestingly enough, I did not feel significantly taller than him. And I did not feel significantly shorter than him either. Remember, it's a full-body statue. So I walked over to him and basically stared him right in the eyes. I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. There was a very profound expression on his face. And let me tell you, he stared right back at me. And his point, if you will follow along with my imagination on this a little bit, his point to me was crystal clear. He didn't have to say anything. I could see it in his face. His point was, we did this. We made this happen. God blessed us. And we succeeded. And we have handed you a country of freedoms and prosperity absolutely unique in American history. What are you going to do with it? It's almost as if he was aware of the threat that America was facing, and he was staring right at me, telling me that it was my turn. It was my job. And it didn't matter whether I felt up to the task or not. So I went home and poured everything that I could into that 2024 election. I joined Early Vote Action, at first part-time. So I was working 12 hours a week with Early Vote Action. I was teaching full-time. I was coaching with my son's Little League. I was supposed to be a father and a husband too, from July through November. 5 months, roughly. Most exhausted I'd ever been. But we succeeded. I don't know how much my contribution added to our efforts, but I know that it was everything that I could give, and then some, to make sure that my son grew up with the same freedoms that I had, the same freedoms that these men and women, through God's blessing, had passed on to me. And after the election, I immediately started looking forward to our next history trip. I wanted to go back to Founders Hall. I wanted to go back to the Constitution Museum there and report to General Washington that we had successfully defended the country that he built. So I did. Same museum was part of the history trip again. Made a point to visit the same room. And I walked over to General Washington. And again, he looked right back at my eyes. And this time he did say something. He said, it was as if he said, well, and I looked right back in the eye, looked him right back in the eyes. And informed him, as best I knew how, that for the time being at least, we kept our republic. And I swear that bronze statue cracked a smile. And it was worth it. 5 months of being very, very tired was worth it. Now listen, I know that what I did to protect our country and our heritage of freedom is nothing compared to what the men in that room who built our nation have done. It's nothing compared to the hundreds and thousands of men and women who have served in the armed forces over the years, and it was nothing compared to the other figures who were much more influential in that election, chief among them being my boss, one of the chief among them being my boss, Scott Pressler. But what I do know is that I did everything that I could do. And to me, that's what makes America great. It's normal people, or people even a little bit less than normal, a little bit more insignificant than average, like myself, stepping up to do what they can. That has been our story as Americans. Through God's blessing, there have always been normal people who have done what they could. And somehow, they have always been led by extraordinary people who did extraordinary things. There's always been someone in America's darkest hours to get her through. And then there's always been the average ones who were willing to do what it took to bring the vision of that extraordinary person to reality and to keep America free, keep that flag flying. So as you celebrate 250 years of the most incredible, God-blessed nation in human history, be thankful. Don't forget your incredible heritage, and don't be afraid of it either. Embrace it. And do whatever it is that you can do. Remember, no podcast next week, as I will be celebrating the 4th of July a little late with my family. Thanks for tuning in today. You can watch, follow, and subscribe, like on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. Appreciate your time. God bless America.